Hello everybody and welcome to the 102nd edition of the Frank and Stan chat, and I'm delighted to be able to say that we're joined again by my brother Barry Norris, who is in Swansea today. Well, that's where he lives. So hello Barry.
Hi, good to be here again.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to have you
again, Barry.
I think not just saying because you're my brother, but actually we've had the most stimulating of discussions before we press the record button already. So I just hope that we can match that on the recording. So
no, Frank, it's all going downhill from now. All going downhill.
Do you want to just explain, what your career and what it led to and what you're currently doing?
Well, I started out as an English teacher and then became a head of department in North Wales, and then eventually got a job in the inspectorate in Wales called Estyn, and I did that for about 28 years, inspecting primary and secondary schools mainly, but a whole range. In the end, I inspected across 12, 13 different sectors in Wales, mainly because I've got the English background, and of course literacy goes on in lots of different places, and there's provision for literacy in prisons and work-based learning companies, FE colleges all over the place. So it was quite a diverse, quite wide-ranging experience, which I enjoyed immensely, and gave me a good insight, I think, into lots of things that are going on in Wales. So I am a bit of a Wales enthusiast. Apologies for that, but maybe that provides a slightly different perspective from the one that you and Stan have.
Yeah. Well, I think also I'm aware of the fact that you were writing poetry from a very young age. You used to do that when we lived together as young children. But I mean, are you still doing that? Well, I know you are.
Yeah, still writing, away, and still enjoying that. Still trying different things. Wrote a lockdown novel as well, just to try my hand at that. Always wanted to have a go at that, and that time seemed to be a good time to have a go. So yeah, very much interested in things to do with English and writing, creative writing, and so on. And that's part of the thing I hope to mention to you a bit later on. We're going to tease you a little bit with that, but yeah, hopefully have a little chat about some reading. The reading list that's come out recently.
Fabulous. And Stan, well, you've had a bit of a week this week, haven't you?
I have, yes. In the background, you might just be able to hear my wife still coughing. She caught the dreaded virus, we think, at a funeral, but we're not absolutely certain, because you can never be absolutely certain. So we've had a week of living in different rooms and communicating by text and everything else. So it's not been an easy week.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we wish you well. You sometimes get a cup of tea after the recording. I don't suppose you're going to get that this morning, are you?
No, it might be, but it'll be more than 2 meters away.
Okay, well, what's caught your eye this week then, Stan?
Well, there's several things, but I shall
we'll allow you to do a few of them.
Right. Well, the one thing, first of all, that caught my eye was the independent report at Holland Park, and which describes a culture in a school that seems to be horrendous, and yet at the same time it's an outstanding school. So I think what I was struggling with is where you get a school like that that's isolated in the fact that it's an academy, where does the local intelligence feed when you know something's not right in the school? I mean, it ended up with, I think, pupils and students writing an open letter to the governors. I think that's what finally triggered it. I don't know the full details, but it just made me think of when I was an advisor. I can remember going into a school where a head said, "Do you know anything about the school that's down the road?" And I said, "No, it's not one of my schools." "Well, you need someone to go in there because there's some problems." And I'm picking it up, this head said, because I've got a lot of parents trying to get their children into my school all of a sudden.
All right.
So, I just wonder where that local intelligence feeds, because obviously I fed it back to the advisor for that school. We did go in, we did find there was some problems with the leadership in that school, and it got sorted. And I worry that with so many now multi-academy trusts, etc., whether that local intelligence is still there to provide that route in for people who need to check on the culture of some schools.
I think it's funny because Fiona Miller, the Guardian reporter, was a guest of ours about 6-9 months ago, and Fiona spoke. I don't think she spoke specifically about this school, but she had written a number of articles about it because she was hearing, and she's not a great fan of academies. So I think that in effect and the fact that Michael Gove and John Burko's children attend this school, it feels as though there's been this sort of like a little bit of a political battle going on about academies are good, academies aren't good. Tories are good, Tories aren't good. All of this seems to have been sort of wrapped up in the sort of how it may have been perceived to be more difficult to unravel this because of the conflicting sort of views on where people stand over this sort of school. But 580 pages
of a report,
and I think the findings were that there was grounds for believing.
The damning final for me is, on the balance of probabilities, every complaint is found to have happened.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, because all the complaint investigations I've done, I don't think any have been all upheld. No. There's always been partially upheld, or some, have been not upheld. The idea that all of those grounds of complaint have been upheld is extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a point. I mean, this is a world I don't understand, right? Because we don't have academies in Wales. Yes. So we still have local authorities who run their schools. We have consortia who are, if you like, the old advisors. They're kind of school improvement kind of groups. And of course, we have Estyn and the Welsh government. And I suppose we don't have as much competition because parents mainly send their children to their local school. We still have catchment areas and things. So I feel like a little bit of a dinosaur, hearing some of this, thinking, what is it actually like then if you're in an academy? If you're a parent, you can't write to the local authority, can you? You can't, where do you go if you're hearing these kind of bad things?
I think one of the things here, just to say one thing's here, I think this is a single academy trust. I think this is a single academy, I think. And I think that's a risk, because actually you can get within it a sort of like governing body, trustee, member. This is all the key players in this, Barry, that actually they're all wanting to preserve what they've currently got. So they're not open to this external challenge. It's only when Ofsted or when there is a problem with the budget that actually things start to come in from outside, so they can easily get to a position, as this school did, deflect complaints from children, from past students, from members of staff, from the community. They can just get good at deflecting all of that, because actually at the end of the day, they feel as though, well, we're providing a really good education for the vast majority of children here. Michael Gove sends his kids here, this sort of stuff,
So what
it said was Ofsted inspectors were misled.
Well, they binned the questionnaires.
And rewrote some of the questionnaires from staff. They destroyed some and rewrote others.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, so if you, in terms of the composition of the governing body, then, I mean, obviously in Wales we've still got community governors, we've still got local authority governors and things like that. So if you're an academy, who gets to be on the governing body then? Don't you have people who are there to kind of look after the school for the sake of the local community or anything like that?
Well, there is no requirement, for trustees, for them to be representatives of the community, and in a way, and that's what I think is one of the fundamental differences between types of academies, So there, and I because people will be watching this, I want to be fair to all of those trusts.
Yeah, it's not an anti-academy.
Who do this. We're doing this because we feel as though together as a community, involving the community, we can make a curriculum and an experience much more meaningful for children. So in that sense, it's not anti-academy, but actually the greatest concern has been where trustees have actually been far too cozy, and where actually, and I've been public about this, we have CEOs who are trustees. That is absolutely, it's like, I mean, you can imagine it's a close vote. Actually, I've got a few of my mates. I don't see them as mates, but they're confidants, they're supporters of me. We'll vote as on block here. And actually we'll just get it over the line. So and also
where you start to talk multi-academy trust and several schools, then you've got an opportunity to have some, a head from one school saying, yes, I'm not sure what's going on in the other school. You've got that kind of quiet conversations that go on, and we all know they go on, that feed that local intelligence until somebody says, maybe we need to look at this formally, or maybe an informal visit will. And I just worry that, for a school to get in this state that this school seems to have been in, and nobody really accessing it on a formal basis until this independent inquiry was done, it's really quite frightening.
I know that another former guest that we know did part of an investigation which found some real failings, and this is somebody we know very well, Stan, who was involved in that. And it's a real sort of conflict here, isn't it, in terms of what makes a really good school. Actually, if the vast majority of children actually are not actually being affected by this, and they're actually getting, if you view it as they're getting good grades, they're going off to great universities, whatever, some parents will view that as a really great experience for them. But actually, it's how bad does it have to be before you lose that good sense of it for it, because it's not serving some of the students very well at all. But actually, you get to the point where you think, oh God, this is a weighing job, isn't it? It feels like that, but it shouldn't be.
Say there was a culture of favoritism. So some pupils and staff were favoured, and therefore got advantaged by it. And you can imagine that how easy that is to do when, let's see who your parents are, what influence you've got. Make sure this child does really well and we look after. I
thought Ofsted had a kind of portal where people could kind of put in their worries about schools and things like that, and so that there was an avenue, not just through the questionnaires, which are done formally before the inspection, but there was a kind of way that maybe some of this could have been filtered through.
But often, Barry, what they say is the first thing they do is look at the last inspection report, which said this was an outstanding school.
So
they do investigate these sorts of complaints, but actually, as Stan said, you can imagine something that flares up in a school. Ofsted still needs to make a decision. It may have done an investigation quite recently, but if it then flares up again, is that actually undermining the investigation we did? Or is it actually this is something really difficult? There's something going on and we're missing it. So I think that one of the points that Fiona Miller has consistently said, and I'm not just saying Fiona, but there's others in that group who feel as though there's a lack of transparency around the governance arrangements around schools, academies. She's probably right, and actually there is the wording in the governance arrangements document, which said that it's really, we have the worst case scenario where we have trustees who are members. Now members are the people like in a charity who actually close the business down. They close the charity down, and so we do have still, this is not preferred practice, but it is done because there are certain Tory peers who actually are basically have set up their trust and are actually wanting to be trustees and members. And in order to allow them that flexibility, the wording is worded in such a way that it's not the preferred model, but it doesn't stop you from doing it. So for me, I think it's quite dangerous having trustees and members, because you can see how the CEO, who is a trustee and actually is able to then group that trustee group together, how they could actually hoodwink members and perhaps deflect criticism because of that.
Well, it sounds to me like, from my limited understanding of academies, but from what you've both been saying, that one, maybe a single academy on its own is too isolated, and there's potential for things to go bad without, you know, it being picked up. And there's all sorts of ways that the governance arrangements need to be tightened up to stop conflicts of interests, you know, making things worse. I mean, you'd hope that with a report like this, it wouldn't just be learning about that school. It would be more systemic learning going on that could be applied throughout the academy system.
I think there've been noises to say that I think in the white paper it actually says about improving the governance arrangements and the accountability. I think that's part of the whole academy-led school improvement sort of. The decision of the white paper is everyone will be academies, but in order to do that, we need to strengthen the governance arrangements and the accountability arrangements.
Well, I think you know, it's. I mean, you had a couple of others, Stan. If we're not careful, it would be the Stan what's caught your eye. We'll get on to Barry's after this one.
Well, the other one was the exams. I think for me, finally, people sort of using what's happened in the last 2 years to say, surely there are other ways of doing exams. And they're now talking about online exams with adaptive technology that you know, it won't happen next week. It won't be next year's exams. But if we at least accept that that's the way to go, then we can start to get to a point in the future where I think students, young people should be able to take exams when they're ready, not at a certain date. They can take them online. It can be adaptive, so they don't need 3 levels of papers to go through to decide what level they're at. There's so many advantages, and if we can take the time away from all that preparation for a one-day job, then we can do some of the wider things that we really do need to think about, like children's well-being, like experiences in the curriculum that are growth forming, all those kind of things.
I mean, this works well in some subjects, doesn't it? That's the issue as well. It works better in some subjects than others. I mean, I'm just thinking about an English GCSE exam.
Yeah.
You know, how that technology would actually enable you to understand whether or not a child had successfully answered the question.
Well, yeah, I this is where I would come in, I suppose, and say, and this may play to some other sort of themes that we've been discussing, but there's been a massive move away from coursework towards, you know, and it's been like a theory that's been going around that coursework was kind of just ended up
soft.
Yeah, parents ended up doing it rather than the children and all that sort of thing. Now, when I was teaching English in England, in Staffordshire back in the day, you know, we did 100% coursework English and 100% coursework English literature. And there was an awful lot of moderation that would go on. And, you know, we would have meetings locally of teachers and we'd share, you know, portfolios of children's work at grade boundaries. You know, and there were some hard decisions and you had to put all your class in a rank order. And if you got those grade boundaries wrong, your whole class was brought down, you know, or your whole class was moved up. So there was a lot invested in it. But of course, it meant you could adapt your curriculum. You could do the books that you thought were going to work with those children. You could kind of get children excited about things and do kind of, you know, a useful range of things. Now, to me, there's a kind of that seems to me to fit my understanding of how children learn and what's the best way for a teacher to work with children, you know, identifying what's going to catch their interest. If that book works with them, go there. And also there were lots of rules, you know, you couldn't just do the same old books. You had to do some poetry, you had to do some pre-20th century work, you had to do some Shakespeare, you had to, so, you know, I felt it was a very rigorous thing. It was quite a hard thing to do as a teacher, but I think it worked with the children. Now, why have we moved away from coursework? It's because the teachers were in control of it rather than ministers in control of it. You know, and it was thought to be soft and flabby and all the rest of it. But I think there's great scope to use technology to go back to coursework and to sort of look at coursework again, especially when you think of the COVID experiences that we've had with, you know, schools. You know, I think you could really build on that and put an argument together to say, look, we've gone too far in rejecting coursework. I read a book recently by Dave Goulson, who's a professor of biology in, I don't know, one of those southern universities, and he writes really great books about nature. And he was saying that he wants to see a natural history GCSE come in, because children, it would help children understand the natural world more. But he was saying the proportion of course field work that goes on with biology and botany and everything has got smaller and smaller and smaller. And he says the thing that used to turn children on to become, biologists and field workers was the coursework, was the field work, getting out into the field and seeing the animals and having them in front of you and doing those projects. And how much are we missing as experience by just rejecting coursework? Because coursework is something, I think, that's very, very valuable.
Well, the crazy thing, Barry, is I think it's at GCSE and A-level, but computer science, the students study 20% of that program is on coursework.
Right.
And the coursework is marked, but it doesn't contribute to the exam grade.
Oh, no.
So actually, when you think about
is that?
Computer science, the element of this is application, you can actually do quite a lot of work around something called user experience and stuff like this around computer science, which is particularly difficult to do within an exam setting. So imagine the motivation level. The kids really get a lot from that. They really can see its application. They can get them, but actually, you get to a point where
crazy.
What's the point? Well, this is fun, but why am I doing it?
I know.
Waters and Brighouse in that book, that they advocate that schools should have a chartered assessor who is responsible for the moderation in that school and is trained in that, and so that becomes their responsibility. And what they also argue in that is if you take away from the examination bodies, there's £1 billion, I think, you can throw back into education. So these people can be trained with that money to be able to moderate internally and shared moderation across schools.
Let me go on, Barry, you finish off and then we'll get into what's caught your eye.
And that would be a way to kind of boost professional learning, because what was really valuable about the coursework was seeing everybody else's coursework. And all the good ideas that they were having, and you kind of take it back to your own kind of lessons, So I think the day of coursework, that pendulum needs to come back.
I agree.
Okay, well, what's caught your eye? I'm 23 minutes into the into it, and we're on to the what's caught your eye, Barry.
Well, what's caught my eye, and it's on the kind of English thing again, is the Queen's the big Jubilee read list. So I don't know whether you've come across this, but a group of academics and sort of book people have put together a list of books to commemorate the Queen's Jubilee. So there's a book for every year of the Queen's Jubilee from 1952 through to 2021. And it's quite an interesting list, and it's caused quite a stir because of one, who's on it, and two, who's not on it. So the first thing that caused a stir was the fact that J.K. Rowling wasn't on it. And of course, she's had a massive impact, on readers and the British film industry and the world and everything else. So there was a big, big fuss about that. And obviously the Telegraph and the Daily Mail saw it all as part of an agenda to silence J.K. Rowling because of some comments that she's made about gender and so on. The person who was in charge of this list was Sushela Naster, an emeritus professor of modern literature at Queen Mary University of London. And she said that she didn't make the list, J.K. Rowling, because they decided in the end it was a children's book. And so two things, I thought, one, it might be interesting just to think about the reaction. And then, because the Telegraph, Alison Pearson in the Telegraph, she said, it's the feeblest, most politically correct, dismally unpatriotic excuse for a reading list of all time. So she was absolutely bonkers about it. She said that she thought, I consider myself fairly well read, and I could only recognize 27 of the titles. Now, what I thought was revealing about that was, it's typical, isn't it, for somebody like that to look at a list and think, I want everything that I like to be on that list. And if they put things on the list that I don't like, then it's the wrong list. So it's somebody from the Telegraph saying, I want the world to look exactly like I want it to look like. But, you know, the list tries to get all these countries from the Commonwealth in it because, you know, it's the Queen's Jubilee list. So there's only 14 out of the 70 books are from the UK. The rest are from Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago. They're all in English, but they're all from all over the Commonwealth. So when I read the list, and I hadn't read Alison Pearson in the Telegraph then, I thought, wow, this is really interesting. There's all these books here that I haven't read. Now somebody's saying to me, these are really interesting books from all these other countries. And I just thought, well, I'd like to have a read of some of those. But Alison Pearson in the Telegraph here remember, she said, I'm very well read. I consider myself well read. I could only recognize 27. So there are, 63 books she doesn't know, but she's decided they're all rubbish.
But imagine though, Barry,
but she's never read them.
Was Tolkien on the list? Can I just ask a question? Was Tolkien on it?
No, that was the other fuss. There was a fuss about J.K. Rowling. There was a fuss because Tolkien wasn't on it. And of course, Lord of the Rings came out in 54, I think, or something like that. But there are other, you know, Evelyn Waugh wasn't on it. William Golding wasn't on it. Philip Pullman wasn't on it. You know, there was no fantasy or science fiction. John Wyndham wasn't on it. Arthur C. Clarke wasn't on it. You know, all these sorts of things. But the other thing I thought was if they decided J.K. Rowling was, and that's what they said, they didn't put it on the list because she was a children's author. I thought they missed a trick because why didn't they make the big Jubilee reading list of children's books? And then they could have put J.K. Rowling in there. Roald Dahl's not on the list. They could have put Roald Dahl on the list and they could have had really good fun going through every single year, all those 70 years, thinking about, well, what's a really good book? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, 1964, you know, whatever you want to put on there. Goodnight, Mr. Charlie. You know, you can think of all these books, which would be great books to put on there. But also, having looked at, I've tried to put together my own little children's book.
I was going to say,
for all those years. I've tried to kind of start putting it together. But what I realized was, I don't know any children's books from Guyana. I don't know any children's books from Dominica. I don't know any children's books from Jamaica. So, you know, it made me realize how limited I was in terms of my understanding of the broader cultural writing that there is within the Commonwealth. And made me feel a bit guilty, to be honest, because I'm reading that kind of one narrow line of literature, but I'm not reading broadly enough. So unlike Alison Pearson, rather than thinking, well, these must all be rubbish because I don't know any about them, I thought these could be really interesting books. And the same with the children's books. Maybe there's lots of children's books in Australia, Canada, you know, in the Caribbean that we just don't know about, which would be really interesting to find out about and to read.
But to link it to the point you were making before about teachers having control of the curriculum and how they assess it, it would be lovely to think that a head of English somewhere says, thinking like you now, says next year, those year 10 and 11s, we're going to pick up a couple of these authors from the Caribbean, and we're going to use that as part of our ongoing coursework, you know, as well as I don't know, Romeo and Juliet and some 20th century poets or whatever you want it to be. But the fact that you've got that flexibility to really sort of shape the curriculum in a challenging way, because I think there's something here about, I'm trying to lead into something here for you, Barry, that, you know, actually, isn't it really about just playing safe and doing what is acceptable?
I know. I remember once seeing the list of A-level texts come up, and I chose A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul. And because, you know, I thought, well, I haven't read that before. That would be interesting. But my head of department was horrified because we didn't have all those books in the cupboard. I've got to buy a whole load of books now. And he saw how thick it was. And he said, are you sure? Are you sure? You know, and it was like the most terrifying thing. And he said, we haven't got any notes or anything. We can kind of photocopy. You're going to have to do all this from scratch, you know. So, and as you say, it's inertia, isn't it? What have we got in the cupboard? What have we got notes for? What can we just kind of make our lives easier and simpler and do that? Rather than, well, what might be interesting? What might be stimulating? And it was a great read. I recommend it to, and it's on the list. It's on the Queen's Jubilee list, you know. So, but well, the other comment is, though, isn't it interesting in a way, because it's a bigger question about the curriculum. If you're a child and you're from the Caribbean or you're from India, isn't it nice to see something in the curriculum that's about you, or it's about your heritage, your history, rather than it always being about somebody else?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Also, wasn't there something didn't you go up in the loft this week, Barry?
Oh, my up in the loft. Yeah, it's always bad news when I go up in the loft, because I'm always looking for something up there.
I think this relates really to thinking about.
If it's like me, Barry, you're always going up there looking for something, but come down with something else.
Well,
it's more interesting.
That is very, very true. I can spend very many happy hours up in the loft, and then Julie wonders where the hell I've gone to, you know. But I did go up in the loft, and I was looking. I've got a little section up in the loft of, you know, the old education books that I, you know, got when I was, you know, thinking about becoming a teacher. And I did spend a fortnight watching Frank teach in a primary school in Manchester, and that was obviously, you know, I'll have to write up that experience at some point, you know. But that was a key moment as well, seeing somebody teach, being in a classroom, being with children. And I'd been doing different work, you know, at that time. Worked in doing lots of sorts of stores work. I worked for Woolworths for a bit and worked for the North Yorkshire District Hospital for a bit. And so it was, you know, just to have that 2 weeks thinking, well, could this be for me? That was very, very, you know, interesting. But up in the loft, I looked at these old books, and there was one book there that really kind of caught my eye. And I just wondered whether any book like this could ever be published these days. And it really is a stimulating book. I'd recommend it. It was in the Penguin Education Specials. If you remember, was a kind of series of books that the Penguin Education produced for a while. And I just kind of really, really like them. But this one, I'll hold it up here. It's called, if you can see it, Teaching as a Subversive Activity by Neil Postman and Charles Weingartner. And it's got an apple with a fuse in it, like this is actually a bomb, you know. And this is what the book is trying to do, to kind of explode the settled view of education, you know, particularly when it was, you know, when it was written, which was when, if I can try and find out quickly, it must have been in the 60s, first published 1969. So it's trying to, you know, be bold, be assertive, be critical about the condition of education at that time. So it's trying to get you to criticize the kind of political, cultural, social norms that are being propagated by the education system as it was then. So I just thought, wow, you know, would you actually publish a book like that now? Or would that be deemed to be too subversive? Could you put the word subversive
I know.
in a book about education? You might put radical now. You might put radical, or a radical view of education. You know, that's okay. But would you put subversive? You kind of feel as though that would trigger all the kind of Daily Mail and Telegraph response. You know, there'd be a kind of nuclear reaction if that came. And then I looked at others, to be honest. And there was one there, the famous one, How Children Fail, with John Holt. And then A.S. Neil Summerhill.
Wow.
And I thought how kind of, in a way, these books that were coming out at that time were all trying to get you to think about, why are we teaching? What is education? What are the fundamental ideas behind it? How can we change it? Whereas when I look now, or when I was inspecting schools and you'd see books on head teachers' desks, they wouldn't be anything like that. No. They were nothing like that at all. In fact, the most popular book that I saw on teachers' desks was, head teachers' desks, was that John Hattie book, Visible Learning. Yeah. That seemed to be going the rounds an awful lot of the time. Yeah. But again, that is a book about, I don't want to get into any arguments with a professor of education here, but that seemed to me like a book which is mainly about, well, there's all this research being done. What things have the most effect on attainment? You know, so it's trying to tweak things, really. It's trying to kind of tweak things a bit. You know, let's have a bit more, make the subject criteria clearer. Let's make the learning goals clearer. But when things, he says, you know, like homework, that doesn't have any effect. School uniform, that doesn't have any effect. So I didn't feel like, well, this isn't going to change education. This is just improving education a bit. Whereas some of those old books, teaching as a diversity activity, that wants to chuck the syllabus out, chuck the curriculum out. Let's go back to basics. Let's kind of have a really theoretical, you know, attack, as it were, on what we're doing and see where we are.
Yeah, I think the John Hattie book, what it did for a lot of people was smash some myths.
True.
That
true.
You know, for example, one of the classic ones in it is, you know, reducing the class size virtually doesn't have any difference to outcomes.
Yeah.
And you know, everybody thinks intuitively that the smaller the class, the better chance everyone's got. We'll get on to yours now, right down to getting to a tutor, individual tutor.
Yeah.
But I think it made people rethink about little things. But you're right, it was about tweaking what existed to get a slightly better result at the end. But the result is all about attainment, not about whole children, not about children's lives, well-being, etc.
And it's part of that school effectiveness program, isn't it? Which is judge a school's effectiveness by the assessment outcomes, really.
Yeah. And what are those? Yeah, I mean that would be a very good discussion for one of these, wouldn't it? I mean, we simply haven't got. I mean, that leads in. We haven't got quite our head around what are the right measures or what are the right indicators of a success. But for me, quickly, mine's around the government's desire to create a league table for schools that, in terms of how well they've used the national tutoring programs. And I was contacted by Schools Week yesterday for a quote on this because, as you know, I'm involved in Blackpool, and Blackpool apparently does really well. It's one of the top performing, do you want to hear that? Top performing areas in the tutoring table. But actually, on the basis, though, that all the schools have just actually been using that sort of approach for quite some time. You know, so the actual engagement with a tutoring, not the national tutoring program, is very high. But actually, the sustainability when they started to use it to supplement their own work was really poor. So there were simply not the tutors around. Those, I mean, that we have had instances of tutors saying they'll be online at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They simply didn't turn up, you know, and we've found that the quality is very, very weak. And so it's just petered out. So schools have ended up just doing, well, we're back to where we were before. We've had this sort of national tutoring program. We knew it was going to fail, you know, we did our best. But actually, we're back to where we were, trying to sort out our own problems with our own community in our own area, trying to draw on people who can help us, you know, and that's where they're at.
I don't think it's a bit of blame shifting, Frank, because
I'm sure
there's a disaster. So if we put a league table of schools, then we can say, see, it's the schools that haven't used it properly rather than the fiasco that it's been.
I think in Wales, there's been a real problem with teacher supply. I mean, getting supply teachers has proved to be really, really difficult. So isn't the tutoring program just kind of another attack on the supply side? You know, I don't quite get it. So if all these kind of people who've been trained to be teachers suddenly start doing the tutoring, aren't you going to have kind of supply teacher problems? And if they all do go into supply, you aren't going to have people to do the tutor things. So I don't know quite how that's supposed to work.
No. Well, I think, that's all part of the issue here. I mean,
just give the schools the money that is frittering away and let them deal with it. It's such a simple idea.
But the thing, I mean,
we were all about autonomy for a while, weren't we? In schools, you know, when the academies came in, it was all about giving schools the autonomy to get on because they knew what was needed, what was best. So when did that change? Because we should just be saying we need some catch up if we do in fact need that. Where do we need it most? Let's put the money in those schools where it's needed most. But
how much has been wasted already? Because didn't the money go to one organisation and then it was taken off them and given to, was it Randstad or wherever it was, and then they cocked it up. And so how much money is actually being given and wasted on failed organisations? You know.
I know.
And now I think they are giving it to schools now, aren't they? They decided, well, that's a whole. Why didn't they just do it in the first place, like you said, Stan?
The thing is, though, Barry, is that in Blackpool, like we're always compared with Newham Nick.
What, Blackpool and Newham? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a nice.
I know. Because actually, in terms of deprivation, whatever measures, there's sort of different levels or different types of deprivation, but you can marry them up a little bit. So Newham's one of the most deprived communities in London. Blackpool is one of the most deprived communities. I hate the word deprived, but it's the easiest way.
Yeah, I get you.
The country. But actually, Blackpool, I think it was 18% of adults have a degree. In Newham, it's 43%. So just locally, you are awash in Newham with people who have got qualifications that as a school you can use. In Blackpool, there's a grave shortage of it. And anybody that's got a degree in Blackpool is probably working somewhere else, doing some work, so they're not available, so actually just the supply issue is a major problem for schools in Blackpool trying to get tutors, just trying to get people to help them. So anyway,
I'm fairly sure, Frank, and I can't cite where I got this from, but the qualifications and the range of education that parents went through, particularly their qualifications, is an indicator of how well the child will do. So you're already on the back foot there, aren't you?
Yeah, you are. Anyway, great chat. I mean, we just
room 101, Frank.
No, I'm coming to it. Right, Barry, you've last week we had our 101st edition, and James and Andy created the Room 101 scenario.
Right.
So we're going to give all our guests now the chance to put something in Room 101. So what are you going to put in it?
Right, on the basis of our discussion today, I would put all summative assessment in Room 101. And because that would mean we'd be left with formative assessment, which is all about, closer to the child, real situations, real learning. It's about future learning rather than jumping through a crazy hoop. And when you think about all the time and effort and anxiety that teachers have over summative assessment because of the accountability, this excessive accountability regime, and when you think about all the behaviours that teachers and schools are pushed into because of summative assessment, if you didn't have that and you came back away from that and just said, right, not going to do that, and I bet you the sky would not fall in on our heads. We would have a better education system and better outcome.
Better educated students.
Yeah,
that would be the outcome, I think.
Well, one primary head teacher today tweeted and said the accountability system has reached the point where it needs to be stopped. Is that it's not Securicor, but something similar to that has just delivered their Key Stage 2 SATs papers.
Oh, bloody hell.
You think? Oh gosh, but anyway, well, it's great having you again, Barry, so thank you.
It's good to enjoy, good to be here, good to have the chat.
Yeah, and also just so that Stan can get worried now, is that Stan's actually going to be away for a week coming up in the next couple of months, and
Barry's always dangerous to be absent.
Barry's going to be the new Stan. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. But anyway, thank you very much, Barry, for joining us. Thank you, Stan. Send our best wishes to Jill, and
I hope she gets better soon.
Yeah, and we'll see. All being well, we'll see everybody next week.